Useless ancient instincts you still fight today.
Useless ancient instincts we all still have. As much as we like to believe that as a species we are civilized and technologically advanced, in reality, a lot of modern day society and our day-to-day life is still heavily influenced and, quite honestly, controlled by primal instincts, deeply ingrained in our brains over hundreds of thousands of years of human development. But in this video, we're going to discuss examples of primal instincts that were helpful at the time that today are quite useless or, in some cases, making our lives harder. Let's get started. I would guarantee that most people watching this video, if not everybody watching this video, enjoys a sweet treat. And while some of us enjoy a sweet treat guilt-free, some of us also feel bad that we quite often crave such sugary things that we know aren't good for us.
Well, that's just the reward system in general. I think it's like ancient instincts, the majority of the things that we fight with in modern times is just like the animalistic urge to have a reward-based thing, whether it be from sweet, salts, stimulation. Like, short-form media is so popular in modern times because your brain is ingrained for reward. And so you have, like, low-effort input and high output comparatively ratio-wise for short-form media, so it's the most appealing to you. Things that are hard that give you a lesser reward than, like, people in general and just humans, animalistically, animals in general, want to have less input than they get output. And obviously most of the time those are going to match in like natural survival instincts or survival scenarios. But in modern times, you could have a low input and a high output. And that is the same with like cake, short form media, drugs, stuff like that. Like, so they appeal heavily to humans because you're not really doing that much work to get a massive reward in return.
The reason most of us crave such sugary and sweet foods and drinks was at one point in time crucial for our survival. During the ancient prehistoric days of humanity, food was a luxury and likely the most valuable currency. And it's for that reason that humans were really eating anything and everything they could get their hands on. But not all foods are built the same. Eating bugs and leaves is cool, but nothing quite hits the spot to a caveman like something extremely sweet or
like fruit, because it has vitamins and shit you need to survive.
Something extremely fatty. And the reason for this is simple. Sugar specifically is extremely valuable to the body because it gives your body a quick boost of energy, something that many foods aren't able to provide. And because of this, your body responded extremely positive to this food source that was able to give you such a quick hit of energy. Even if your body wasn't in dire need of energy at the time, your body is able to store that excess energy in the form of fat, meaning that at any time, at any place, if there was anything sweet around, your body knew to consume it there and then. And at the time, this could have
anything sweet. What else is sweet outside of fruit? I can't think. Like, I mean, there's a lot of things that have, like, vegetables have sugars, but sugar. Yeah, but you're not getting. Oh, honey. No, I'm saying in bro said candy. Yeah, I'm saying in like fucking 30,000 BC. You're not making a fucking Jolly Rancher. Yeah, maybe like sugar cane. Maybe certain parts of bamboo, but I don't even know. Can humans digest? You might be able to digest the innards of bamboo.
Meant life or death. Now, unfortunately, the stakes today are not nearly as high. And I would say that most people, if not everybody watching this video, does not struggle with food scarcity either at all or definitely not to the extent that cavemen did. Meaning that eating the bag of gummy bears on your nightstand isn't life or death. It's really just how much willpower do you have to overcome your primal urges. In today's world, eating anything sweet you can get your hands on almost has the opposite effect. Because at best, this excess sugar is just going to put extra weight on your body.
Well, it's so weird because the companies that make these manufactured sweets are so popular now that they're making people morbidly obese, and it's the literal reverse. Like, you needed sugar and you hunted sugar because it was good for you in olden times. Now you avoid it because it's bad. Because whatever you're eating, you're probably, in like modern day, if you avoid sugar, you're going to still eat the amount of sugar you need to survive. Versus if you actually look for items that have the sugar that, is packed into things like sodas, liquid drinks, whether it be candies, desserts, stuff like that. Like, if you just eat fruit, you'll have enough sugar for the day.
At worst, it's actually going to have a detrimental effect on your overall health. the complete opposite of the intent of this instinct in primal times. So if you ever feel bad about having low discipline when it comes to sweets, it's because a caveman hundreds of thousands of years ago realized that berries and honey give you a kick of energy that bugs, leaves, and animal fats just couldn't do. Oh, and as a quick bonus, the reason why everything in the world today is so sugary is directly related to the human instinct of craving excess sugar. Humans don't crave sugar because everything in the modern diet is full of sugar because
I don't like candy as much as I used to. Is that crazy to say? I love fruit. I need if I don't have fruit, I feel like shit. Like, I eat a lot of fruit every day. Like, before I went live, I ate a fucking, like, mini carton of blackberries. I'll eat blueberries later, oranges and mandarins. I still love sweet stuff, but if I'm eating something sweet, I'd rather have, like, ice cream or, like, a pastry of sorts rather than, like, Sour Patch Kids or Skittles or, like, a chocolate bar.
as these companies realized long ago
I'll eat them, but they're not as enjoyable to me.
that humans fundamentally crave sugar. And if these food companies could provide it to you, you're very unlikely to say no. And that's another trend you'll notice in this video. Not only are your instincts personally working against yourself, but other entities are using your instincts against you for profit, which is kind of dystopian. Another more dystopian part of modern day life is the fact that even though we are living in the best time ever to exist as a human, we likely deal with the most issues ever. And this is because humans have a deeply ingrained negative bias, which, like you guessed, in primal time,
I think it's negative bias. It's negativity bias, but it's also the fact that we're living in a society that we haven't conformed to. We've rapidly, grown technologically and societally to the point where we're living in a world so different from our grandparents, and they're living in a world that was so different from their grandparents. So, we haven't had time to adjust, not evolutionarily, but, naturally, mentally. I think that over the course of generations, the scaling might decrease and they'll be more, connected to the world that they live in. But it's there's still a part of you that, even if you're not a fan of camping, there's still a part of you that's used to being in nature, right? Biologically. And a lot of people live in cities and they go to 9-to-5 cubicle jobs. They're never outside. They never fucking go see nature. They're always on their phone looking at a computer. They're living in an entirely different world. And so people have higher rates of depression, suicidal thoughts, anxiety.
Served a crucial purpose in our survival. But in the modern day, in a world full of complexity, it only makes our life that was supposed to be easier much harder. I would argue that most people understand that they should be grateful for everything they have in their life. But realistically, gratitude is something you kind of have to remind yourself to have and do. And this is because your mind isn't naturally programmed to be like, oh, this is so great, this is awesome. No, your mind is actually programmed for the opposite. The ancient primal world...
Well, it needs to do that. Your mind needs you to have a negative outlook on positive things to a degree so you can constantly scale to get better. Because if your brain was naturally developed to where you were always complacent with the situation that you were in, you would never actually try to succeed and get better, make better survivability tools, store excess food, get better, have offspring. You would always just be, I guess, comforted in the situation that you're in. There's always going to be a part of you that wants more. That's why billionaires also, they get obsessive with money, but it's also there's people that get a lot of money and then want more money. It's because whenever you hit a goal, you're never done. Now you feel unsatisfied with the goal that you've reached after a period in time and you need to set another one.
Was filled with real immediate dangers, natural disasters, predators, other tribes, famine, and so forth. You and your loved ones' lives were consistently under attack. And because of this, the best way to survive in a world where everything could and would kill you is to be aware of those things and to primarily focus on the negative or dangerous aspects of life, which at the time was a lot more common than anything else. And while this bias as a caveman was extremely crucial, in the modern day where almost none of these threats exist, we are still dealing with the consequences of this bias. Just think about it. If there was two cavemen in prehistoric times, one who went on a walk and saw, oh, there's a dangerous thing, I'm not going to go there. Oh, I stepped on something sharp, this place could be dangerous. I'm going to go home and remember this and just, keep this in the back of my mind. Versus a caveman that went on a walk and was just oh, that's a pretty tree. Oh, cool. That's a cool looking lion running directly towards me. That's majestic. Which of the two do you think is going to survive? And I mean, the answer is kind of obvious.
Yeah, being extremely cautious and pessimistic is good in caveman times.
But like I mentioned, tiger attacks and starvation are fortunately not much of a risk for many people today. So we transition this worry and this part of our brain onto other aspects of more modern life. Job security, social status, rejection, failure, the opinions of others. And because the world that we live in is just so complex and there is...
Wow. Because there's no, you have that trait for survivability reasons, but now it's actually useless. So you still carry that into just regular social settings and you're always going to have a worse perception of yourself because you're still just going to carry, like, you're going to focus on the negative things so much more. I always knew that. Like, everybody knows you focus on negativity more than positivity. Well, like, 5 positive comments from somebody is outweighed by 1 negative comment. Like, that's just how it is, right? You try to ignore that, and I think you should. But, like, when you have 1 bad thing that happens in a day, you could have 10 good things that happen in the same day, and you might perceive that day as being bad because of the negative thing that happened.
So much to think about. And because the negativity bias is an instinct so deeply ingrained within our psyche, if you don't consciously try to counteract this negativity bias, it could lead to some very serious consequences. And it's extremely easy to spiral into overthinking and stressing and, coming up with worst case scenarios and ultimately developing things such as anxiety or depression. And a common example of this negativity bias is, once we lay down on our bed and close our eyes, all of a sudden every horrible thing that happened to us ever comes to mind. Keep in mind, in ancient times, before you go to bed, it's helpful to have a checklist of everything you notice today that could be bad, but in modern times, it's just gonna make going to bed harder and possibly damage your self-esteem. And if that was the first time you've ever done something like that, then you probably experienced a lot of fear, specifically fear of the unknown, which is likely one of the oldest human instincts we all have to this very day.
And I think that's where modern religion originated. Fear of the unknown, coupled with the capacity to speak and the development of language, is how religions were created, in my opinion. Obviously, a lot of people may disagree, but I think that the God of the gaps is a true thing that people need to feel better, and I think it was way, way more needed, or needed way more in, BC times. Back when you didn't understand almost everything about your world, and you only knew, you understood surface value things on how to survive. You had so many questions that remained unanswered, and they would stress you out. So the best way that you could explain them was God, or, whatever religion you may have fallen into at that time.
Our ancestors had to essentially trial and error every aspect of life always, and the stakes were typically life or death. And because of this, the best way to mitigate as much risk as possible was to simply stick with what you know and avoid what you didn't know, which led to the development of the fear of the unknown. During ancient times, exploring a place that was dark and you couldn't quite see, encountering an animal that you were unfamiliar with, or even seeing weather that you haven't quite seen before, all could very well lead to the death of you and anybody around, meaning that the best way to stay alive was to avoid and fear any of these things you were unfamiliar with. And this instinct is still around to this very day.
Well, yeah, there's a level of curiosity, but it's the same thing when you look at animals. Have you ever seen animals that are, like, not accustomed to humans, and they're very skittish? But if you kind of slowly ingrain yourself into their environment, they'll get closer and closer to you, like a rabbit. It might approach you, and then the second you overstep that boundary, it darts. Because it has curiosity, but it also has a innate crazy fear of anything that it doesn't understand.
But once again, in modern times, this instinct isn't helpful and is often counterproductive. And while I would definitely say that there is an argument for the fear of the unknown being helpful today, there is still places where it isn't helpful. Specifically when it comes to exploring opportunities that could ultimately be beneficial. Like, let's say, starting a new relationship, trying a new food, going to a new city, moving, meeting new people. In the modern day when things are so safe and—
Oh my God, when you're changing schools, I remember I used to be so scared of that. Like, elementary to middle school, I had to transfer school. When I was in 3rd grade, I transferred schools too, and I remember being, like, so scared and anxious that I wanted to throw up. Like, it's just fucking, oh my God. Same thing with, like, public speaking. Because it's the fear of the unknown, but it's also, like, that negativity bias that's ingrained in you as a human that makes you think that, like, all you think about is, like, I'm going to stutter, people are going to laugh at me, I'm going to look like an idiot, my face is going to get red, I'm going to fuck up my presentation, I'm going to get a bad grade, people are going to judge me. You would just only sit there and just hound yourself on negative things.
So civilized. There are so many amazing opportunities to come civilized. There are so many amazing opportunities to come out of exploring the unknown and seeking discomfort and truly trying to overcome this instinct. But the reality is just that. This is an instinct that has to be overcome to experience these things. And because of this, there is a saying that I think is rather accurate, is that most people would rather experience a familiar hell than an unknown heaven. And it's interesting because even though in that hypothetical that the unknown situation would be objectively better, because it's unknown, it's still scarier than dealing with something objectively worse that you're at least familiar with. But it wasn't only the unknown that our ancestors were afraid of. There was actually quite a few fears that our ancestors hold that we still hold today. Another example being the fear of failure. Now, once again, there is instances where this fear is still helpful in the modern day, but as a whole, the exaggerated fear of failure is more detrimental to people than it is helpful. In ancient times, goals were simple and immediate. If you were on a hunt, your goal was to secure an animal. If you're looking to reproduce, your goal is to secure a mate. If you're looking for shelter, your goal is to find a warm and comfortable place. And in all of these instances, if you failed to meet your goal, your life or your bloodline was
You would just die.
done. And those stakes are pretty high. And over hundreds of thousands of years of development, our brain began to realize that if we really want something, we cannot accept failure as an option. And while in the modern day, many of our goals are not life or death at all, a lot of people still act like them, doing worse on an assignment than you anticipated.
I think that this has negative, like, associated issues with it, but it's also, like, one of the best motivators. As fucked as it is. Being afraid to fail is good and bad. Like, if you're obsessed with success because you hate failure, you're going to be more successful than people that don't care. But you're also probably going to be way more stressed out.
Not getting the promotion you wanted, having an application denied for almost anything. All of these things are uncomfortable and upsetting, but in most cases, they are not life or death. Although some people still act like they are, but it is so ingrained in our being to have that exaggerated fear of failing that typically only holds us back and will cause us to feel a sense of dread when in reality the situation may be mildly inferior.
Well, there's also there's a section of people that get like stun locked in this cyclical loop where they're entirely unproductive because they're so afraid of the surmounting tasks that are ahead of them. So it's like, I'm fucking scared I'm never going to get a job and I'm going to be a bum. And they spend so much time stressing out about it that they never go and actually get a job, and they just sit there and stress out about it more because they're just wasting more time.
Or potentially disappointing, but definitely not life or death. But another consequence of failure in ancient times beyond just immediate death was also a loss of social status. You see, humans have always been tribal people, pack animals, if you will. And within packs or groups, there is a hierarchy. And within hierarchies, there is status, which determines where you stand on the food chain. In ancient times, we were extremely motivated to seek status, not to satisfy our egos, but to ensure our survival. Because in ancient tribes, the higher status individuals typically got the most benefits, the best shelter, the most food, and so on. And the opposite was also true. If you were low status in the tribe, you would be getting scraps. You would be living in the worst of places. And in severe situations, you would be outright outcast from the group, essentially being left for dead. And for that reason, it's reasonable to understand why seeking social status was so important in prehistoric times. But as we all know, this is not a habit that's gone away. And in modern times, people seek status more than ever. While, interestingly, the stakes are much lower. Sure, in the modern day, there is so many benefits to having status. Celebrities, for example, have access to the best of everything. They get treated better than everybody else. They can afford everything and still get things for free. And there are definitely benefits to that in the modern day. Although I would argue it doesn't guarantee your survival.
Drake got a $185 million jet for free
Anymore. Because in the modern day, you don't need social status to live. An entry-level job, a simple side hustle, or even a small business are all things that could sustain you and provide you a comfortable and potentially even abundant life, with status being completely out of the equation. And sure, this drive for status could still...
Yeah, but people, I don't even think it's necessarily a drive for status. People have, it's not like the average person feels the need to become a billionaire. They feel the need to become better in a higher position monetarily and status-wise than their parents. And that's what the American dream is. Making more money and being more successful and being more known and, I guess, associated than your parents were. Like, if your parents had a minimum wage job, your, I guess, aspirations are going to be, let me do better than they did, and then the next generation is the same. It's not like, oh, everybody needs to feel the need to be like a multi-millionaire.
A better life, but it also could send you on a completely meaningless pursuit that at the end of your life you realize wasn't worth it at all. And I would say in most cases, this drive is almost solely egoic and not survival focused. And I think one of the most common instances that we all experience in regards to this drive for status is...
Except for Nepo babies? No, I think that exists for Nepo babies too. I don't think Nepo babies feel the need to be better than their parents. I think they feel the need to at least match the level of success their parents did or their failures. It goes back to the fear of the unknown and the fear of failure. Nepo babies that are born into multi-million-dollar homes and people that were very successful are going to feel a pressure on them to match the level of success that their parents had.
how we compare ourselves to others consistently. In a world full of social media, we are force-fed other people's lives on a daily basis. And typically that experience looks like, wow, they're doing better than me. And the reason we do this is because we are perceiving them to be higher status than us. And it means that we are at risk of being evicted from the group and getting less than we may need to survive. And as we know, this mindset of comparison and seeing ourselves as less than others who only present the best parts of their life typically leads to anxiety, depression, and many of the other common consequences of having a primal brain in an extremely advanced world, which is why I believe this drive to be completely useless, if not counterproductive. Because in most cases, you just feel worse about yourself, even though you are completely capable of surviving and having a meaningful and happy life. But even if you don't crave being a high-status individual, you typically, at the very least, crave fitting in. Which brings us to the next ancient instinct, the human impulse of adopting a herd mentality. As we just mentioned in the previous instinct, humans in tribes were safer, and humans on their own were not. And while climbing the social ladder is one goal, even maintaining where you are is an entirely separate goal. The human brain evolved in tribes and closely monitored the group, copying all of their behavior because they see that these other people are alive, so they're gonna do what these other living, surviving people are doing, because that's really the ultimate.
And that's how modern TikTok dance trends started.
Goal. And because of that, most people were on the same page. While at the same time, individuals who showed attributes that weren't directly in line with the tribe, whether it be doing something that resulted in their instant death or simply doing something that the tribe didn't approve of, let's say not reciprocating sharing food or not contributing, would result in being exiled, which was essentially a death sentence. If you notice that everybody does one thing and the people who don't do that thing either die or get kicked out of the group, you're going to quickly learn that it's best to do what everybody else is doing and not stray too far from that. In prehistoric times, it meant coexistence. But once again, today, the stakes are not nearly as high. But that doesn't stop our brain from trying to keep us in line with the greater group. Everybody in one shape or another fears rejection. Whether it be talking to somebody you find attractive, trying to sell something, or simply trying to find a place that you belong. Nobody wants to be told no or that they don't fit in. And this is something that we experience from a very young age and most people carry through the rest of their life. And while herd mentality can manifest itself in a lot of ways, it's most commonly experienced by simply not wanting to stand out or make too many waves or rock the boat. So if you ever feel bad about your
Yeah, most people default to, some people want to be centers of the of attention and don't want to be rejected. They want to be widely accepted. I would say the average person, though, would rather be somebody that wants to remain under the radar and just somebody that's a random person walking in the street, right? They don't want attention, but they don't want attention. They don't want either. They don't want good attention or bad attention. They just want to exist and be somebody that, blends in the shadows.
Desire to fit in and want to be somebody else or want to have other attributes so you could be more like others. It's not that you hate yourself or it's not that you're wrong. It's simply the biology of your brain telling you that if you are more like others, you will have a higher chance of living. And while that's not really the case today, your brain doesn't really know the difference. And similar to our fear of the unknown, this herd mentality in most cases in the modern time holds us back rather than protects us. We stop ourselves from pursuing the things we truly love or doing things we really want to do. It stops us from taking risks or doing things that seem out of the norm. The goal of this herd mentality is to keep us alive, not happy. And what that looks like today is simply doing something that you know is safe, even if you don't like to do it, because doing the thing you want to do might not give you that.
Well, and the fucking sad thing is people will change their own opinions from this. Like, people will openly and willingly change how they think for the sole purpose of blending in and being somebody that fits a narrative.
Same safe result. And that could apply to a career, a lifestyle, or really anything. Your brain has decided that the safest way to live is going with the path of least resistance. And what that typically looks like is doing what everybody else is doing. And this is an ancient instinct that is very evident in the modern day. Almost as evident, at least, as our need for control. I would say a good majority of people at some point in their life struggle with having a pretty strong to severe need for control in at least some aspect of their life. Whether it be some sort of power trip or perfectionism or simply a sheer need for things to go their way. The ancient human mind craved control because it was predictable, and it craved that simplicity and predictability, and how that manifested was learning to seek order and trying to create a routine in a world that was completely unpredictable, but somehow simultaneously seasonal and cyclical. And how this looked in ancient times was using this need for this control to establish routines that allowed life to exist, following migration patterns of animals that would sustain your tribe's life.
Well, yeah, and you felt a direct correlation with your input to output. Like, you had that need for control. Yes, you weren't as powerful as an ancient caveman, but the things that you did showed clear results in that you had food, you had water, you were able to survive through the winter. Now people just do their 9-to-5s all the time, and they slightly feel, yes, they have the control in their job, but they don't feel like they have a control in their life because they're just not seeing any results. They're just living in the same stagnated position that they've been in from the start.
Understanding the seasons and following weather patterns and predicting what happens when you saw a certain cloud. Controlling the amount of wood you put on your fire to ensure it never went out. All of these actions are rooted in a desire for routine, order, and ultimately control. But in the modern day, this need for control has manifested rather differently. And the biggest way that our need for control hinders us in the modern day is by people trying to control factors that are out of their control. And this
when you spam press that fucking wait, trying to cross the sidewalk, you know that shit does nothing, right?
That people feel that ultimately leads them to have extreme stress and anxiety about certain situations. In ancient times, the only thing we could control was our actions, and our need for control was based in our actionable pursuit of living. But in the modern day, with infinite information at our fingertips in a world that is more complex than our brain could ever perceive, this need for control oversteps its usefulness and becomes a hindrance, whether it be just being socially unlikable because you are too bossy, or being unable to enjoy something because it is not to your exact liking, or spending your free time worrying about something that you have no control over simply because you desire it going a certain way. And these negative feelings associated with feeling out of control leads to a negative spiral, because if you feel out of control, you feel weak, you feel less. And it's through these negative emotions that our brain develops pattern recognition, so it knows exactly what to avoid, so it cannot feel bad, so it cannot.
Well, it's also one of the reasons that everybody has an innate fear of death, because it's two things. It's number one, the fear of the unknown, which you're animalistically afraid of, and you have the lack of control. There's nothing that you could do. You will die one day, and you can't change that. So you're fearing what is after in the unknown, which is another reason people want to get involved with, obviously their own philosophical beliefs or theological beliefs, but also the fact that you're going to die and you can't do anything about it. And that's one of the only things that you have actually no control over in your life.
Not die. And this brings us to the final instinct on this list. Looking for patterns that are basically not there. This instinct comes from our brains.
Well, that's where racism and stereotyping is rooted. I think blaming racism on animalistic tendencies is in part true, but also wrong, because you could counteract that, cognitively. People are born to group things together. You naturally, inherently see something and want to categorize that in one way or another to make it easier for your brain to condense survivability-wise. But then when you do that with groups of people, you begin stereotyping, and that's where racism occurs. That's where sexism occurs. That's where you start making assumptions about people that you don't know and you may never know just because of one interaction that you or somebody else you know that had 10 years ago.
Natural desire to want to make sense of this world we live in. And in prehistoric times, spotting a pattern could make the difference between your existence and your very quick non-existence. If you notice that every time you eat a certain red berry, you throw it violently, you'll probably begin to avoid that. If you notice a pattern of everybody who wrestles with a tiger turning into red jelly, you're not going to wrestle with tigers. And from these examples, we can see the obvious advantage of pattern recognition. It's our brain's quick and easy way to quickly evaluate a situation and whether it should be avoided or pursued. And pattern recognition works both ways. Similar to our sugar craving we mentioned at the beginning of the video, if we see something that we know is sweet, we are going to be motivated to get to it. And on the same token, we may be hesitant to get this honey because we know that while the honey is sweet, the bees are plentiful and they are stinging. In the modern day, pattern recognition is definitely not life or death, but it is an extremely important part of our everyday lives. And this ability to recognize patterns allows us to maintain a lot of free mental bandwidth, because if every time we approached a certain situation we had to reevaluate it from scratch, well, you would be thinking consistently. But if you have a kind of mental catalog of things you could quickly reference every time you see.
Another cool thing about death in general is when your brain is used to recognizing patterns when you're in certain situations, which is why when you encounter a unique situation, you're kind of like startled. When you're dying and you're going to die, your brain will filter through all your memories trying to find a scenario where you've been in this before to try and pull you out of it, and it can't find one. And that's like a theory as to why people's life flashes before their eyes when they die, because your brain is rapidly trying to find a way that you could get out of this situation, and it can't.
See something you've seen before, your mind is able to streamline the process of thinking, which is something your brain's always trying to do. But here's the thing, even though pattern recognition in the modern day can and is extremely helpful in some cases, much like the others we've discussed that are helpful, they typically overstay their welcome and overstep and can be very detrimental. And how pattern recognition typically oversteps in the modern day is by causing us to misinterpret events without context, overthink situations that are not as deep as we think, or jump to conclusions that are not there. And the reason why we do all of these things is because our mind is consistently trying to understand things. So if we have a little bit of context around something, our brain is going to try as hard as possible to try to categorize the unknown with something we know, which is most often seen when people are generalizing things, whether it be about ideas or even people. Our brain wants to seek a pattern so it can reassure itself it knows what's going on here. In ancient times, if you saw an animal with pointy teeth, you didn't need any more context about it. But in modern times, you can see a person with tattoos and go, wow, this is a bad, scary person, I'm going to avoid them. When in reality, the fact that somebody may or may not have tattoos means absolutely nothing about their character and who this person may be. But our ancient brain that we possess wants to keep us safe and wants to generalize as much as possible, to quickly process information and to conserve as much energy as possible. And that wasn't a knock at people with tattoos. I have tattoos myself, they're just under my red shirt. But it's an old-timey stereotype that I thought would make sense. And by this point of the video, you've probably already begun to recognize some patterns yourself. One pattern is that all of the entries on this list are actually intertwined and typically work off of each other to help your brain do its best to understand things quickly and survive. But another pattern I want to suggest is that our brain is just doing the best it can. It's obvious that our brain has evolved to be as beneficial as possible, and our brain has done an extremely good job of developing an operating system that is optimized to keep us alive in the prehistoric world. However, while we have had a brain that has had hundreds and thousands of years to develop to a certain style of life, over the last few thousand years, our civilization has developed rapidly at a pace that our brain is simply not able to catch up to, which has landed us in the situation that we are in now. We are living in an extremely advanced society using powerful hardware that have a outdated operating system, and we're
I wonder if it'll ever get easier.
just trying to make it all work.
Like,
but
if
the
we'll
bright side is
adapt
this:
to it.
while our brain still has instincts within it that are no longer helpful and sometimes hurtful to us, we still have the power and ability to overcome these ancient instincts. With awareness, focus, and intention, you can consciously make an effort to begin to personally reprogram your brain to be more suited to live in the modern day. And these are things that we've already began to do, whether it be consciously or unconsciously. And at the end of the day, our brain is our friend, and our instincts are trying their best to keep us alive. The world we live in is just a little bit different than what our brain is used to. So we've got to kind of update the software on our own, but that's kind of just part of the journey. So if you've been struggling with any of these things that I've talked about in this video, whether it be a craving for sugar, trying to fit in, feeling bad about other people being higher status than you, or craving control, realize
Yeah, you just got to realize that's a part of, you have to constantly remind yourself, like, hey, this is a natural part of my brain, but it's not something that I should be overly obsessed with. That was a good video, though.